Morning, Harry. How are you this morning?
Roberto, I'm good. How's it by you?
I'm doing very well, man. I like the holidays. I always said that if I leave New York City, I would come back. Even though that I'm not a fan of the cold. I don't know what's happened to me. I remember the old days in the schoolyard. I'd run around with a short sleeve, running around playing football in the winter, and that's not the case anymore. Now I know when it's cold because I feel it in my bones.
You just don't know about cold, about hangovers, about a bunch of these things when you're a kid. Like, oh, that's what the old people was whining about. I hate the cold. I hate when it's too hot, but I love the August here, and I love like after Christmas, just because there are these weird, quiet stretches where all these people leave the city, and it just opens up a bit.
Harry, let's go right in. Adam's time capsule.
This guy, this
Depending on
guy.
who you ask, some people wish he'd put himself in a time capsule, but who knows? No, I'm kidding. Go ahead,
He
man.
could have put his cell phone password in there so he doesn't forget it again.
Oh Lord,
He, I,
cold.
it's rough. All he has is I'm Eric. I'm perfectly imperfect, and this stuff made him mayor. And now he's leaving. He's very unpopular. People are eager to see him gone, although it's not clear how off the stage he'll be as he's job hunting and so on. And this is sort of his last attempt while he has the instruments of power and the office and all that to sort of make his case for himself. But the thing is, he might be right that he's done an okay job in some ways as mayor, and it's been harsh because of the scandals and the noise, a lot of which he's created. Um, but if there's one thing we've established over the last 4 years, it's that Eric Adams is as mayor, he did a very good job as a candidate because he won the election, has sucked at telling his own story. And this seems like a perfect coda for that. With, Kaz Dowtry bringing in a drone to put in the time capsule, and then this saved 400 swimmers this summer. No, sir, it did not. It seems small and clownish and a fitting end to a very disappointing administration, in my view.
I want to hear your thoughts on something, Harry, because there are people that make the argument when he talks about these wins that some of these wins happen because they managed to circumvent a lot of the sort of internal drama, despite his leadership. But always, right? The head that wears the crown rests uneasy, so you get to take the credit, right? Just like you take the hits. What do you think of that? Because there's some people that make that argument to say, look, I got it done, but it wasn't because it was a sort of a coherent, uh, operation happening there. Like, despite it, I managed to push these things through. And as the principal, he takes the credit. I want to hear your thoughts.
I think those are good thoughts, and he does get some of the credit there, for real. So Eric Adams did a couple things. He set up, and thinking about the Mamdani transition now, and it is extremely painfully slowly rolling out in ways that are frustrating the people involved, even though they signed NDAs. And I don't know if Mamdani and his inner circle, right? So Dean and L, like interestingly, and Dean has lots of government experience, full of hand, but like if they quite know what they're about, as I'm watching how slowly this is happening, and these people are excited and glad to be part of it, getting frustrated. I don't know who's in charge. I don't know who knows who's in charge. It all feels like a junior high school cafeteria. But what I'm going to say with Adams is he had a nominal chain of command, right? Like there's an org chart for the city. And then he's like, oh, and by the way, I'm gonna just put my people and my cops and my friend Ingrid in all these positions where they really have the power. And they're not on the org chart those ways necessarily. Um, and so that's thing one. But then thing two is a lot of the people who are doing that, uh, hello, Tim Pearson, seem to be not especially or entirely competent even in the secret second org chart, like the mafia's second set of books or whatever, where you're really accounting for the money and how you're slipping it into the legitimate businesses. Even within that second secret org chart, which I haven't seen, I don't think that they were entirely competent a whole number of ways for who is responsible for what graft or for really running what programs, even though they weren't the person who was responsible for them on paper. So it was sloppy and it was messy. But as Adams philosophically said, and he was right, it's like, New York gets through. You know, things happen here. New York is strong and resilient. And this can be passive and sort of bullshit where, hey, because New York has survived, New York will survive. How bad could it be? But this guy's been the mayor. And yeah, things that happened on his watch. Um, City of Yes, some progress, and I'd be very cautious about that with the schools. Would be pretty close to the top of my list. And containerization, absolutely. You're the guy in charge. You're taking the slings and arrows every day. These are real accomplishments for New York. Congratulations, sir. And don't let the door hit you on the way out.
But can I say something about City? Yes. All right. Let's take a
Yeah.
step back. Major transformational policy that happened. But let's just say, argument's sake, if you have a toxic relationship with the city council, it sure as hell helps to have a Dan Garodnick, who they do talk to, in order to push City Yes, for argument's sake. So
Yeah. And he made that choice, you know, even
but
as
I'm
he had a
saying
toxic one, yeah.
in terms of taking the credit for City of Yes, how did it really get operationalized?
Well, it's interesting because there's so many layers and levels here, and you're saying this is transformative, and the idea is this will be transformative, right? It's a bunch of changes to zoning code and other things that should allow private developers to create lots more housing and which we badly need. But
Harry,
they haven't actually created that housing yet.
but Harry, I don't disagree with the policy and how transformational it is. I'm talking about how it actually happened, how the
You mean
sausage
how
was
it got
made,
through?
so to speak. Correct. I
Yeah.
don't know if that necessarily had to do so much with the principal because of his relationship with the city council, which had to work hand
Mhm.
in glove, is what I'm saying.
I I think getting this through was a huge win despite of that poison relationship. And maybe it was the policy, maybe it was the people, but however you want to slice that up, like can he pull that card and take credit? Can he put that in his time
That's where
capsule
I'm
to get
going with this.
dug up in 10 years? Like absolutely. Absolutely. Credit
Okay.
where due.
Okay. Harry, let's talk about the Siena poll, the recent Siena poll, and obviously the incoming mayor is gained in terms of the court of public opinion, and childcare has gained in the court of public opinion in terms of how we get it done, even if it means taxing and raising taxes. What does that mean? One, for the possibility of it happening. My understanding it's a extremely expensive proposal. What does it mean for the dynamic between the executive and now the incoming mayor? But she's shown signs that she wants to make it happen. But again, this is your time. I want to hear your thoughts.
It's a really good poll for Mamdani. The child care proposal is very popular. The free buses proposal is pretty popular. Mamdani is still quite unpopular among Jews, but is a bunch more popular than he was in their last poll. There's clearly a big wave of let's give this kid a chance, let's see where we're at, and optimism about what might be doable. And he's going to have to spend some of that down. And it's interesting because the same way he ran through the tape in the primary and then largely in the general, and he's still introducing himself to some people, even as now an international figure, right? And he's smiling and he's listens and he's articulate and he's appealing, and people generally have good vibes about him. And he still is. This is sort of the last space for him to put some of that out and convince people, like, I don't know. And maybe they're catching a press thing he's doing for the first time, like the big listening event this weekend or whatever. So as he's banking all that, this is happening as he's encouraging many allies, with a couple of exceptions, what's up, Chiase, to run and challenge existing Democrats. And this changes for congressional seats, for state legislative ones. This is a useful pressure for his agenda on the presently existing lawmakers, right? In Albany, especially, who have to decide on his agenda. And while Kathy Hochul's running for another term, while all these lawmakers are, and he's saying, I have some juice. I have a mandate. I can help you or hurt you in different ways. And here are the things I've just run on and promised. So this helps him cash some of the checks he's written potentially. Obviously, this is a high watermark in certain ways, you know? He's still getting to know, people are still getting to know him, really. And he hasn't been mayor yet, and he hasn't had to deal with a terrible thing, a snowstorm, a real snafu, and there will be lots of them in the best run administration. Um, but he has political capital to spend, and I'm hopeful that this transition is going to get it together. This administration is going to move quickly, although getting more pessimistic about that, and cash in some of this credit while he's got it. Because you don't collect interest on it, it like the stuff you put in your time capsule, it actually rots pretty quickly, and you wait a year or two, and all those shiny things are dirt. So this is the moment when he has leverage, has a chance to act, and a poll like this is a further proof of concept for the demand for the products he's offering is a really promising sign.
What do you say to the argument that the incoming mayor had a general? Doesn't he get a sort of a leeway there because he had to run a general? This wasn't decided in June in the traditional way where you can say, okay, I won. I'm likely almost 90% there. Like years past, like argument for de Blasio Loda, right? It was like kind of done in June, as opposed to Mamdani having a formidable opponent in former Governor Cuomo having to say, hey, I can't worry about who I'm going to put where because I have to beat this former governor. Don't you think they get some type of a break there in terms of the appointments based on the fact that it really wasn't decided till November? So is that a fair criticism to say they're moving slow?
Probably, but I'm taking the short end of this bet. I'm just like he was 75% at least to be mayor from June on. He knew he had a real race against Cuomo and then possibly Adams and what the dynamics were going to be, and he could not turn his attention from that. But when a whole part of your appeal is you're young, you're energetic, you're really plugged into the city, you're listening, you give a damn, you have all these critiques of the Adams administration. And this is a guy who's smart, been around, had seen some of this, and all the time he burned between June and winning the primary and actually becoming mayor in January, running against clown Curtis Sliwa. That was Adams' description. But um, no, I think he could have and should have done some of both. And I understand that there are many people when I say this who are responding exactly the way you are. And he had other priorities to do. And if you don't win, everything else is moot. But I'll put it this way. Um, the Department of Community Safety, which according to City and State's profile of El Brisgard Church, right, was actually her brainchild, was a great idea and a stupid idea, and a terrible idea. Let me make that right. And it was a great idea because it helped him win the election and talk about policing in a clearly critical way without talking about defunding the police or any of those other buzzwords or things. And that was really important. And it touched on some of the big unsolved issues about not calling someone up because somebody is emotionally disturbed or whatever the case may be, and then having that person needlessly shot and hurt by police officers. Whole bunch of stuff there. However, no one knows what this thing's going to do. This seems an awful lot like de Blasio's much maligned Be Heard program. There are all these questions about what's different here, and it's creating a new bureaucracy that's going to replicate, as Brian Stedden laid out in a very useful Vital City piece, right? Replicate lots of existing functions that different departments already have. Like nobody knows what the point of this thing is. I know what the political point of it was, but he has to actually do the thing he said now, or quietly decide he's not really doing it, or he's going to make this as ceremonial as possible and continue to administer within the present system. Like, those are all his problems now. And he knew that there were elements of this, I hope, that were nonsense much earlier on. I'm guessing he might not have. The same way he doesn't know anything about education, about the health department, sanitation. I don't think he's given a lot of thought to these things. I think he reads a bunch of pieces, like he's a voracious reader, talks to New Yorkers, gets some information in, but he doesn't have expertise there. He doesn't know that people have expertise. These haven't been his priorities. And he had between June and November, while making sure he won, to start getting really smart and up to speed. I don't think he did that. And I think he should be faulted for that if my presumptions are right. We won't know for, give the guy till June. Let him come to power. Let him build his administration. It's not actually, he's got to do all that by January 1st. And we'll see where this is at. But I am noting that the warning signs are accumulating. I know I'm a little ahead of things criticizing him when he did just run a competitive race for having a slow and sloppy transition from the things I am hearing. But also, you promised a lot of energy, a huge breath of fresh air, despite incredibly challenging circumstances. The Donald Trump administration, you're promising that we're going to live easier in a time when there may be less money in the city's coffers. Like, man, you got to know what that means. And you have to know what that means for who you want to appoint, who they answer to, what the priorities are, where you give people space, where you don't. And I don't know that that's the case, and it concerns me.
Well, Harry, what again? And this is I'm going to just probe you a
Please.
bit on that.
Yeah.
Dean Foulahan was OMB director. No, wait. Dean Foulahan was OMB director. NYPD and the DOE reported to him. The only major city to open schools was New York City, right? During the pandemic. The lowest rates, considering there is no other city like New York City in the country. We're talking about low rates of infection, right? When COVID was at its peak, in terms of how the city eventually managed a global pandemic, right? Then another gentleman that you interviewed, the editorial board, Patrick Gaspard, right? Another a seasoned veteran that goes back to Dinkins, right? He's being advised by top level government people that have been around the block. This is not their first rodeo. And Dean Foulahan, I forgot to mention, was also the architect of budget and policy at the state level, right, for Sheldon Silver. So these are not people that are, hey, these are run-of-the-mill, 30-somethings from, the progressive left here. These are seasoned veterans who've been around the block a few times. But that doesn't give you any reassurances that in terms of what he's thinking and how he's thinking it, that there's a level of understanding there, or are you still baffled by that's the argument I'll make to you? I mean, it's not just he's a voracious reader and he's prepping and he's talking to people. There are some people that again have been through multiple crises at a state, city, national level, to say the least.
So Gaspard, who we talked with at the edit board and was actually on my podcast, FAQ NYC, before that, is like a really impressive, thoughtful, experienced communicator and doer. And and is obviously the bridge between the Mamdani world and like the Obama world and parts of the National Democratic Party in ways that seem helpful and promising to me, because it's not a world he knows. Foulahan is incredibly accomplished, knows how the sausage gets made, and was a very useful and promising appointment. He is the one appointment, and there's a couple embargoed ones as we're speaking, I think will be out by the time this podcast is, but mid-level. In a month of transition now, he's the one real new appointment we know of. We knew Elle was going to be in her role. We already knew that Mamdani wanted to keep Tish. That's it. And that is very slow. And if it turns out, it doesn't matter. He's still not mayor. He won't be mayor for another couple of weeks. And he gets the right parts into place. And this is a long run. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But still, if it's a little slow and a little stumbly up front. And again, I'm just talking to a lot of people in these transition committees, and who knows what those matter for, who are a little concerned and a little frustrated and don't quite know what they're getting asked to put into and are the volunteering. And these are, grassroots people, like top level boss type people. All this, everyone is saying, does someone else know who's in charge? What's getting figured out and how? What's this white paper I'm working on going to be good for? And that is worrisome to me in some ways. Last thing I'll say here, because you brought up OMB and Dean, so one of the things I've heard from a number of people in different parts of government in the Adams administration is the profound frustration with Jacques Gia and essentially having the agencies and the departments and the commissioners neutered because everything runs through OMB and having staffing issues. This especially applies to people providing direct social services, but sort of across the board where, hey, we need 40 people. We know those people are. We have budget lines. And OMB is like, well, you can hire 6 of them right now. And sort of using that as the choke and control point, both for budgeting, but also in a lot of ways for policy making, because so much of that actually flows through budgeting. And this sort of open question about whether that bottleneck approach is going to continue or not under Mamdani, or if he wants to actually empower his commissioners and his departments with a clear and broad sense of mission, a sense of what the resources available to them are. Like really, what the budget says is what you're hiring for, and can do so in a reasonably quick and efficient way for government at least. And I'm very interested to see how that plays out, who gets appointed there with schools, where again, I don't put this on Mamdani at all. I actually put this on Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams and others. Almost he doesn't know much about education. He hasn't thought that much about it. He stepped into it repeatedly because he said the little bits he knows without fully knowing the context. None of that's on Mamdani. Like, pressure makes diamonds and all that. What's supposed to happen is you get pressed by other candidates, by constituent groups during an election, and it forces you to get smart and figure out your positions. That's part of what the exercise is for. And incredibly, we spent so much time in this race on sort of diffuse spheres and about crime and sometimes terror and Israel politics and things like that. And I understand why those came up. But one of the results is Mamdani wasn't pressed on these things. I bet you money that the present chancellor is going to remain there at least, and she wants to keep the job, at least until the end of the school year, right? Because the other thing is, a lot of these decisions you actually don't have to make January 1st. You have to say, this person, I'll consider you for the job, or would you be willing to stay for another 3 months? And you have time to work that out. It's a big machine. He has some very smart and wise people around who've experienced it before, but they're still instruments. Like he is the conductor, if you will, and the instruments can only do sort of what he's telling them to, how he's establishing that. The person on top really does matter in those ways, even if, as Eric Adams says, the city generally survives no matter what. And it's a complicated machine. He has to work out which levers actually connect to which points of power. He did a wonderful job at that during the campaign. But the campaign is a way simpler exercise. It's like, am I winning or am I losing? Am I making up ground or am I losing ground? That's it. Running the city, and when you're not doing this in a Bloombergian way, last thing, where it's like garbage is getting picked up, crime is down. You can point to very basic statistical measures, and that's it. I've succeeded, I've failed. Adams tried to do similarly, but more vaguely with get stuff done. Mamdani is promising vision. So how are you measuring that vision? What do you say success looks like? Those really big basic questions. And he does a lot of word salading. He got asked about the pre-K thing earlier on in the transition, and he gave like a 200-word answer to eventually get to, I basically promise it'll be done by the time I leave as mayor, which I think will be 2 terms. And he thinks it'll be much faster than that, I'm sure. And he was just trying to avoid putting down what the threshold is, but that's a big part of his job. If he wants to be the messenger and do this, he needs to have a clear message and what aligns with that, what doesn't. And that's not just talking about big ideas, but it's talking about what success looks like, how he thinks he should be judged, all that. And he's been a quick learner, but I think he's just starting to figure some of that out.
Let me ask a budget OMB question, because that's an important thing, right? Where we're hearing this current Mayor Adams and the sort of November plan and hiring more cops, and even Times alluded to some of the the Elizabeth Street Garden and make it a parkland, and how, and even one of your colleagues in the press world, Chris Summerfield, talks about a bitter Eric Adams sort of walking out of City Hall, bitter. But what I would say to this, right, in terms of the budget question and the sort of policy, and the budget's a moral document, et cetera, and what he's walking into, when it comes to Jock Jihad, for argument's sake, right? Whether you agree or don't agree with the way Jock ran the sort of city in terms of the budget, aspect, let's remember, let's take a step back. Dean and both Melanie Hartzog had both been O&B directors.
Mhm.
So the argument can be said, right, when there are checks and balances there in a previous universe. That
And
wasn't
just to
the case
jump
in
in
this.
real quick,
That
Dean is
wasn't the
who set
case.
up the chokehold,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But he
But
did that during COVID, and then Jock inherited that, and the Adams people decided to keep it going to slow down the rate of hiring.
I understand that, but I'm saying the argument that someone in the House understands that process and can sort of serve as a check, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like someone that had done the job before can say, hey, I did your job. We're going to agree to disagree, but this is who served in that position in this current universe, is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Whether you agree or disagree, that's an act, that's a reality. But so let's move on. Let's talk about some of these congressional races, and what it means. There is a lot of DSA rumblings. Now it's gone from a federal to now to the local races. What are your thoughts? What does it mean? And is this the current mayor demonstrating it sort of wanting to play at a federal level and just fully understanding that he has a Trump reality and he needs allies at the federal level? What are your thoughts? Or is it more of I'm part of this institution, I'm a member, but what's going to be is going to be? What are your thoughts?
He's all up in this mix. I brought up Chiase already, and being like, nah, we can't have him run against Jeffries. And I would point out that the extremely popular mayor-elect, who's a real active DSA member, not a paper member, as they say, right, had to say it publicly, which you don't want to do. You want to do it quietly if you can, and then show up at the DSA meeting to be like, I actively don't want this to happen. Please don't let it happen, ahead of a vote where the members in the district, the only ones who have a say here, barely voted. It was like 52-48 with every possible person voting to be like, Osei should not run. And then he dropped the run after that. But that was the mayor spending a lot of political capital on this while he was neglecting largely the speaker's race, or certainly getting publicly involved in that, which is something he could have direct control over. So that is interesting to me. Um, Getting on Brad Lander to run against Dan Goldman is very interesting to me. Like, Goldman won because, unlike in the mayor's races, right, which are most, you don't have ranked choice primaries. It's just most votes wins. And the primary is usually what decides it. And Goldman wins his seat a couple cycles ago because the progressives are split and no one clears out of the race. And as we're seeing this year, it's super crowded in this district. I'm sorry, is that 10 or 12? 12, right? That's 12. And so now Mamdani has spent capital, sort of cleared his books with Lander, right? Who was he had debts going back and forth from how the mayor's race played out. Lander is sort of WFP. Mamdani is DSA. There's overlap, but there's tensions. All this stuff. You'll be the guy, and you're going to run as the Zionist who is openly against AIPAC, and you're going to say, Lander, a bunch of mushy mouth stuff about why you're running against Goldman, when every other sense is like a super ordinary progressive Democrat who votes how anyone else would in that district. These people are pretty replaceable, interchangeable. But he's saying AIPAC money, which also is in the first line of Chi's thing. The DSA member who now wants to challenge Richie Torres, Michael Blake, who runs for everything, is also already in that race again. Um, so what you're seeing, what I think Mamdani is seeing, is that his theory of the case about a very different politics within the Democratic Party about Israel are manifesting. That his opportunity to have leverage nationally to some extent, but significantly with the New York legislature, and to use this issue as that leverage is growing, and he'd like to take advantage of that. So the same way when de Blasio comes in, he almost gets indicted for messing around with money, not because he's pocketing any of the money, but because he's like, I think I can change the dynamics in Albany, get rid of the whole weird IDC thing that sort of let Republicans stay in the game. That's it. But like Mamdani sees his opportunity right now, sees Israel as a very significant lever there. And again, almost every candidate who's announced has APAC in the first 100 words of their announcement video. And that's new and really striking, and certainly not how that has played out in the Democratic Party until now. And without sinking us into Israel politics or anything else, I'm just observing that this is a new dynamic and is leading to lots of primary challenges. And these are generally in safe seats, but they do drain some resources from the party as it's looking to retake control of the House. But it looks extremely likely they're going to. Um, and so he is placing really big bets there in Albany, getting involved in some of the congressional races. And this is happening at the same time that, like Greg Meeks, who did not endorse him, right, who now is the boss, if you will, of Queens and a Congress member, was really central to helping Julie Menon, the incoming council speaker, who plainly wants to be a counterweight to Mamdani in a bunch of ways, although she's talking around that now and what they have in common. Um, had that big success. So it's interesting watching people play on like slightly different game fields that we know are going to converge, and they're placing their bets and where their political capital is best spent. And it's going to be a while before we know those answers. With this stuff, frankly, we have to get through at least the primaries next year, to see whose bets have paid off, what this means for political power and Mamdani's agenda. His big advantage is we will have a state budget ahead of that. And so people who now are facing challenges from DSA aligned people who Mamdani is supporting, right? They're going to think about that when they're like, wait, how are we putting money into pre-K? Are we actually going to get to this free bus thing? Where, to the extent lawmakers have power over that, um, it's helpful for a new mayor to have leverage. He has 1 year, one golden year, which is why it's great New Yorkers voted not to recommend changing the years our city elections are in, where the mayor has a mandate and everyone in Albany, which is where the real juice is, the real power, has to listen. And he seems like he's preparing to spend that to have as much leverage as he can for that year, which I take as actually a very promising sign for him.
Harry, who can take the credit for the outcome of the speaker's race? Labor, county leaders, you mentioned Congressman Greg Meeks. Again, as a counter, if the argument can be made, who can take the credit for making that happen? Or did the incoming mayor say, hey, the juice ain't worth the squeeze? I'm just not going to get involved, because at the end of the day, I still have a lot of council members who are politically aligned with me, and we can still get things done, right? What are your thoughts on that?
It was
And
all of
how
the
much?
above.
And I'll take a step. Let's take one step back. How much juice or clout do county leaders still have? Right? I mean, we know about judges. I mean, poll workers, surrogates court. What is left in terms of that, or is it still a formidable sort of pocket of power in the city, or those of that an era bygone, or is this demonstrate a reemergence of county leader power?
It's a reminder of the remaining power they have, and you just listed all the juice that's there. And while those things don't matter narratively very often, poll workers, surrogate courts, and then the lawyers, those judges you're basically deciding on, who are getting paid that way. But all that stuff is genuine patronage. And patronage matters because you're talking about like money that people actually depend on and structure their lives around and have some sense is reliable. And
And
this is the
one other
institution.
thing, for argument's sake, central staff in the council too.
Oh, indeed. That's a very good one. And yeah, so this is sort of the remaining juice that county leaders have. Labor, which has its own real complications, the same sort of generational fights between more institutional minded top leadership and a membership that wants more power and say on its own, right? They're largely lining up behind Menon, who was not who Mamdani wanted, and he stayed behind the scenes. He did ask, like, "Hey, can we have more time before we get to a decision here?" And it seems like that's what pushed Meeks, Menon, Labor to be like, "Let's announce and try to lock this in now." Obviously, we won't actually have a speaker until the new council is in office, and then they vote on one. But she has the committed votes, and it seems very much like a done deal. And she's announced it that way. The other people have dropped their challenges, sometimes very reluctantly. Um, so this is a sign that the non progressive DSA movement aligned powers that be in the city that sometimes have different or diverging interests are working on what their points of traction still are. In I think really interesting ways. And the other complication here is that the council is really weak. Like, I think it makes a lot of sense for Mamdani to focus his efforts on Albany, even though individual lawmakers are also basically replaceable, but collectively they have a lot of power. The city council passes local laws, but they have to beg Albany for all sorts of things. They have some subpoena power, but they haven't really used it. You have little staffs and small amounts of money you can sort of sprinkle around your districts, but we have the strongest mayor of any big city in America by a bunch. And I think an incoming mayor who's aware of that and how much power he has and how symbolic the council is in a lot of ways. However, he's somebody who cares a lot about symbolism and showing a consensus and the strength of his movement. And I'm really interested to see how all this plays out. Basically, everyone who was not a member of the Progressive Caucus and the few people who were all lined up behind Menon in the end. And that is the strongest indicator of an undertow or a countercurrent in a year where all the other signs were going in one direction. And by the way, Mamdani ran a great campaign. He had some real luck in enemies and who he was running against. But like, I have to note that a fair amount of what's happening, and he's done a brilliant job packaging this, was just a response to Donald Trump winning office again, a really distressing and brutal second term. And if you just squint and look across the country, in California and Virginia and New Jersey, like Democrats, wherever they were aligned, like overperformed. And obviously, and very different types of Democrats. And New York is such a significant and marquee place. This was such a breakthrough victory for the DSA, for a young South Asian Muslim. Like new political identities and demographic ones emerging as political players in New York. Like all that's beautiful, but also somewhat circumstantial. And I do think the biggest single force is having such an intensely dreadful, I'll say, administration in Washington that seems so not rule bound, opened up a lot of space here for the sort of run we have and the sort of mayor-elect we have. And I don't know what that means for how much space he'll have to actually govern. And given those same dynamics, it's an interesting question. Like Cuomo's strongest appeal, in my view, and Adams, as their appeals overlapped here, is we can keep Trump but someday and deal with this terrible guy. And Mamdani's sale was, I don't want to do that. I want to be clear about what our values are, and that's very admirable, and I think correct. But also, I think will be much more challenging in practice, despite one nice meeting at the White House where the two of them agree that they're both theater kids, like being on camera, and are competing for some of the same audience, right? So we're very warm to each other, if you will. I think this will be extremely challenging. And, I'm very hopeful that this really impressive young mayor who ran an incredible campaign is up for all that, but it's a lot.
Let's talk, Harry. Let's talk a little bit about the NYPD. And you and I had an interesting conversation yeah, legitimately almost a year ago. That was almost a year ago. That was, the NYPD and John Shell and Kaz having this aggressive social media battle with reporters. And Craig McCarthy mentioned being called a you know what by Tariq Shepard, and here it is. Jesse Tisch is still the police commissioner. Some of these people are now put in their papers. Was it a clever, slow house cleaning? I mean, some of it was aggressive initially. What are your thoughts? I mean, some of it was like, you're like, okay, well, she's in charge, but is she really? Because the shells of the world were still around and you had your own thoughts on what it meant on paper. I want to hear your thoughts a year to the date, right?
Ooh, a lot going on there. I think she is more and more increasingly in charge, but some of this is progressive and circumstantial. And part of her method for gaining control of this big, really self-interested and internally reflexive institution. Like there's more Kremlinology inside one police plaza than anywhere this side of the Kremlin or possibly the New York Times. Um, so she kept Madry on as chief of department, which is the top uniformed cop, and in some ways the person who's really in a daily way operationally running the department. Madry is a really appalling human being, and this didn't come out after she put him in. He'd been promoted to that job initially, despite having a thing where, forgive me, but like he was, as I understand it, in a park with a woman he was cheating on in a patrol car, beating the hell out of her. When police showed up, he takes out his badge and tells them, "I'm Madry, go away," and they do. Right? Like this is a bad man. He eventually leaves not because Tish decided he needed to leave, but because he got caught like doing really shady like sex for overtime money deals with subordinates. When that happens, she brings in John Chell, who's like, an emotionally dysregulated, sort of ridiculous character who thinks like more chases are always good, but you can't let the bad
Hey,
guys
Harry,
get
let me
away.
stop you for 1 second. Dysregulated. I've never heard that word before, but it's a new one. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. A
Oh, just
dysregulated.
look at this man's Twitter. He thinks this is common sense and real talk. I'm like, sir, I'm a New Yorker as well. I can
No,
talk
I know.
in
That's
these
why it's fun.
registers.
That's why it's fun talking to you. Go
Get
ahead.
the fuck out of here. And he did, but now he's yappity yap. I'm a doer in the arena. Like, sir. So he some of these parts have cleared. It's a very complicated institution to run. Her hope when she got the job, because Adams had put himself in so much hot water with so much corruption and nonsense, and so much of it involving the police, was that she could turn this ship around. Not even, there wasn't enough time left in the Adams administration. She had 1 year. It's a big ship, right? She could start turning the ship around and then Adams could somehow recover, or she could work with some new mayor and have another year or year and a half or 2 years to show that everything she's doing is for real. Shootings are at a record low. Murder numbers are really down. Assaults continue to be persistently high. Some of this is advertising and a little less impressive than it seems. Like a lot of this is matching national trends. It's not all just stuff the NYPD is doing. There's really obvious, significant tensions between her and the mayor, who both agree they're going to work together. About raise the age, about Israel Palestine, about policing to some extent, um, potentially about task forces and coordination between the NYPD and federal authorities in our sanctuary city. And they both, Mamdani and Tish, think that they can manage this in a way that will work for both of them. Mamdani knows if crime explodes, suddenly he changed everything to affordability narrative goes away. And that is an overwhelming problem. Tish knows if she can continue some of the successes she's already had and or demonstrated, I think there's some difference between how this is getting perceived and what's actually happening. That she can really prove her case as a manager and a leader, and she clearly is very ambitious. I don't know if that involves running for office. I sort of think not. But wants to prove that she can run large institutions and the sort of leader she is. And if the two of them are able to align, I doubt it. I think some of these pressures are too intense. I think people on the left are furious she's sticking around.
Mm.
I think there's people on the right who are deeply suspicious of her working with and taking orders from Mamdani. But if the two of them could find a way to balance those things out, I think it could be really good for New York City, really good for the NYPD, really good for this administration, and give her time to show that she's actually cleaned house, reprofessionalized the place, and made it a better and more competent institution. But I've avoided writing anything positive or negative because it is a big ship. It's complicated. There's success signs and failure signs, and I don't want to just be judging every news blip. But it's going to be a really interesting year, and then behind all this will be who Mamdani is thinking of as the next commissioner, because he's going to be making that decision in the next 2 years, I assure you.
Interesting.
And there'll be
Mm.
lots of palace intrigue about that. I see some of it already starting, but I'm like, too soon, too soon.
Wow. Harry, that's the other. I remember the previous, not this current, the previous administration during MIHZQA, which was arguably a very progressive policy, right? That wasn't the case prior to that, right? In terms of making sure that people receiving tax breaks would have to build a level of affordable housing, right? And I remember the fallout between then Mayor Bill de Blasio and New York Communities for Change, well, which were sort of part aligned and had endorsed them, and Bertha Lewis had her differences of opinion with Bill de Blasio. How long can the force and the relationship between the incoming mayor and DSA last in terms of, right? Look, at the end of the day, will there be a sort of level of practicality there in saying, hey, we have one of our own in charge. We can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Politics is about the half a loaf and the art of the negotiation. How long does that last?
That's the $1 billion question. And we it's very interesting to see. I think the New York City DSA has been more practical minded and interested in trying to actually get to power than the national movement, in part because the New York one is further along. And you can feel this, going back a few cycles, right? We could talk about AOC, but I would talk about Tiffany Caban. Speaking of people who might be now a council member, might be in the congressional mix, but she ran for Queens DA, Greg Meek's backyard, and she was like the decarceral radical, and people were like, oh, what is this kid? What's going on? Those people, they did what the machine used to do. They busted ass. They knocked on doors. They talked to people. They made inroads in other people's strongholds. They ran a really impressive campaign, and lost, you know, by an eyelash after a recount. And that was assigned to me and happily to, I think, to much of the DSA membership. But like, wait, we need to get serious about what we're going to do if we actually win power. That this isn't just a game or a narrative exercise. Like, these things are starting to manifest. I very much hope so. I'm not aligned with the DSA on everything, but I want people at power to have some competence and handling it, right? And narrating and executive authority really are two different things, although they are more closely converged than they were even a decade ago. One of the things Trump and Mamdani sincerely have in common is they're people who became aware that if you can say it, you can make it be in ways that other people rolled their eyes at. And I think that is increasingly true and different. The rather than sort of be bound by what has existed and can work, that there are new frontiers and political possibilities, and people who can speak directly, openly, and clearly about them in ways that relate to voters and don't sound like the same packaged stuff and like sort of pre-compromises with language and so on. There's a new space for them. Um, Politics, but I don't think Mamdani has that much space with the DSA. I think it is a group that considers its leaders literally small r representatives and avatars of the movement and expects accountability from them. Mamdani dodged my questions I asked 5 times maybe over the course of the campaign over a year Like right now, like there is an executive committee where all the electeds who are DSA members meet with some of DSA leadership, such as that is, to talk about the party's agenda, what they're doing with that, and so on, and sort of syncing coordinating. I'm like, you're going to keep doing that as mayor? Because in my view, that'd be crazy. And I'm sure he won't, but he avoided directly answering the question. I assume, and I'm making assumptions here now, to avoid alienating his DSA base and being aware that there's only so much space to say, I have to act with my own authority. But I think he's slowly trying to do that. And I think they will pretty quickly up the pressure on him as he makes these decisions. I think the last thing, even vaguely approaching a break he's going to get is the Tisch decision. And I don't think that break will last. I think that was just to sort of get him through the election and the inauguration. And I think people there are very angry about that.
But
A
here's
lot
the
of them.
question: where do they go? For argument's sake, right? Ocasio's allegedly had her differences with the DSA, despite being
Mhm.
their initial. You mentioned Caban, but that was on the back of, the sort of Ocasio victory,
Yeah.
and
And, and, and that,
they've
that
had
that's
their
what killed Joe
differences
Meeks.
with the current elected class, some of their own. So, I mean, the question that begs the question: where do you go? Do you go to the traditional run of the mill Democrat from the machine, or do you say, hey, that's what I meant with practicality?
I'm right there with you. But like, this is a group that's like, we don't need as much practicality. We need honesty and sincerity in politics. And we want to hold our own to real account. And I think there's something admirable and something crazy about that. And then you get to, what are the options? Where else are you going to go? So Ocasio-Cortez knocked out Joe Crowley. It was like, longtime congressman, boss of Queens, possibly, going to be the next speaker if the Democrats, like in leadership in Washington, because he didn't tend to his garden in his district, right? And there's been lots of that happening, but now you have these people in power. They start moving away from you a little bit at a time. They have to represent the whole district, not just the party. And do you stand behind them? Do you support internal challenges? I don't know the answers here. I'm very interested to see in both in speech and in action how the DSA as an institution, and it is one now, a political institution, but also just the left more generally and the farther left more generally comes to some of these decisions and what compromises they're willing to accept, and especially inside of New York City and state. The thing that's looming over everything here, by the way, is the decent but real chance we could end up with a Republican governor. And that Republican governor, be it presumably Elise Stefanik or possibly, Bruce Blakeman, I am strongly willing to bet that they will run on in the general and then follow through as governor on, I'm going to just fire the mayor. Right? Like the last gubernatorial election was all about, hey, Al Bragg, who'd just been elected district attorney like 4 months earlier, this is Lee Zeldin, who's now the EPA commissioner for Trump, right? Who was a congressman. Lee Zeldin, like his signature campaign thing was the black guy who just won the job. First black guy ever to hold the job, who hadn't done anything yet, who won his race in a democracy. I'm going to fire him. And the governor has the power to fire the mayor. This came up with Hochul and Adams, although Hochul, chose not to do anything and said the voters should decide. Fair enough. Um, So everything we're talking about is within the confines of Democrats run the whole show and game. And if Republicans get one little part of power, they're going to say, like, everything is asymmetrical, it's unfair to us, and we need to maximize the powers we have and, like, take control of things, common sense, which means whatever they want it to mean. And that would change these dynamics dramatically. So I am very interested in how these challenges play out, how the Republicans campaign against whichever farther left Democrats win or knock out incumbents, and where we end up in 13 months from now. It'll be one way or another a very different game.
All right, Harry, you've already made predictions. You said current police commissioner, a year and a half, 2 years, right? As
I said
commissioner.
once a
Oh,
year and a half, 2 years. We really are going to see. I think it's going to be awfully hard to keep the
okay,
balance for her and
okay,
for
okay.
Mamdani.
All right, let's go down the line now. Goldman Lander, who wins?
I'd have to think, squinting Lander, yes, and he seems to have quitted for one.
Let's talk about Reynoso and Valdez, if it's official, I don't know who wins the Nydia Velázquez congressional seat.
I am so you're I'm very interested. Your guess is as good as mine. I'm betting on Reynoso, but that might just be I've spent more time in a room with him than Valdez and found him like impressive as a young avatar. But I really don't know.
Richie Torres skates, sails to victory, or he's got a real problem.
I think he's got a real race. I would not bet against him in that real race.
Michael Asher, is it walks into the Jerry Nadler seat?
I actually think so. I think with the 22 people running and all the nonsense and hot Kennedys and whatever, yeah, yeah, I would not bet even money on it in a roughly 57 candidate field. But if I'm betting on a horse, it's absolutely Lasher.
Let's talk Gonzalez, Rojas, Jessica Ramos, another one that, depending on who you ask, it's a Cuomo blowback, it's a casino blowback, it's, I don't know. How do you handicap that one?
Again, squinting, I think there's so much ill will toward Cuomo. You see it on like stickers and like chalk all around the city still, month and change after the election. I have to think Ramos is in tremendous trouble. And I think this speaks to some either opportunity that they're intelligently taking advantage of or insanity on the left. Because if you were just like looking at this outside of the politics of the last few months, the idea that Ramos needs to be punished and have a challenger because she's insufficiently pure would seem totally insane. And so this gets to some of the stuff that's happening there.
Yeah,
But I think she's in a lot of trouble.
That begs the question to a private conversation. What is the purity test? Right? Where's the line? What defines it, right? Like some may make the case for Reynoso. Like, why does he need a DSA challenger? What in his progressive chops is he lacking? Ben Max highlighted, right, that he has the Israel Gaza stuff, maybe. I don't know, but it's interesting. Or what constitutes asking Alexa Viles to step aside when she's just as progressive, maybe even more so than Lan. I don't know. I don't know where the line begins or ends, but more will be revealed. Harry, we've had a lot of fun today. Anything you want to add? This was a real deep, probing conversation you and I had. It.
We covered
By
a
the way,
lot
can I
there.
say something to you?
Thank
Can I
you.
say something to you?
Yeah.
You know, Spotify sends this thing over the numbers. You were my #1 episode last year. People love to hear Harry Siegel's opinion on things.
Oh man, people got to get out more. Touch grass, smoke grass.
What do you want to add, Harry, that I didn't talk to you about? We had a lot of fun, that was for sure.
Ooh, the Knicks won a championship, but it's a bullshit championship.
No, I don't know. I have a lot to say about that. I have a lot to say about the wild card in baseball.
Oh.
I have a lot to say about the DH.
How about ghost runners? What is that?
I have a lot to say about the pitch count.
Yeah.
I think it's throw the ball, hit the ball. I mean, I can get on and on and on about the sort of money ball thing. Harry, what's your favorite album all time? Let's talk about some general
Man,
stuff.
that is too much. Too much. Favorite album all time.
Favorite album all time.
I think the 3 albums I've listened to the most in the last 30 years, I'll do it that way, are Money Jungle, which is, Ellington, Mingus, Roach, just playing a little outside and totally inside. It's just beautiful. Blue Mind State, which I don't know. I put it on and I put it on again, and I'm happy. And then a couple of late Townes Van Zandt albums where it's just telling corny ass jokes and singing beautiful songs, and like those are some of my pure spots.
Harry, if an out of towner were to come into New York City and says, Harry, why don't you take me to a bar watering hole that sort of exemplifies and the sort of spirit of New York City, what bar would
Whoa.
that be? Somebody said, Harry, I want to feel and smell, the New York, What bar would that be? If they would say, let's have a drink, Harry.
Oh. I'm a contrary and mildly sour guy. I love people coming to New York. I think this is a city it's a port city. Like in an immigrant city, people are supposed to come here and then get out and then come back here and whatever. I grew up here. I feel like that's unnatural. But I would take them mischievously to to ooh, the bar on the corner of Church and McDonald's, Farrell's, which is the grimiest, smelliest, scariest place I'm willing to go in. I do mean this as an endorsement. I've been drinking there since I was 14, but go in very rarely. And it's a bar of a sort we don't have anymore for people who drink and get off shift and drink or don't have shifts and drink, and there's conversation and there's space and I love it for
P.
the
Hamill
vast
mentioned
majority.
the Farrells. Is that the Farrells?
Oh, hold on one second. Because I was thinking Shenanigans, which is different local bar. So is it Farrell's? I'm flipping names here now. I'm worried. Um,
It's all
let
right.
me. I'm hitting the internet before I blow this up. No. Farrell's is like the cop and firefighter bar at the other end of Windsor Terrace. The bar of McDonald. Oh my God, what is the name of this place? I'm 48.
Maybe because you were spaghetti legged when you left there, you forgot the name.
It's very much that sort of place.
Yeah,
And
that could have been the case. You forgot
I'm
the
getting
name
like
when you
with
walked
Danny's,
out.
Danny's.
Okay,
And
got it.
and the whole neighborhood around it is little Bangladesh now. And then there's this
Okay.
rough ass Irish bar that is not exclusively Irish. It was for a long time, but it is exclusively rough. 70% male and just an
Got it.
interesting environment, at
Got it.
least.
Harry, let's go down the line. Mets, Jets. I mean, Jets, Giants. Jets, Giants.
Don't care. They're both terrible. They play in New Jersey. Football's a little depressing. My dad busted up his knees, so I've kept my distance.
Nets, Knicks.
Oh, Knicks.
All right, Mets, Yankees. Last one.
Mets just for not being the Yankees. I'm trying to remember who it was who said Mystique and Aura are nightclub dancers. I think that was uh, what's his name? Bloody Sock Man, Schilling.
Let's go, Harry. I know you got to go. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, man. Talk
Hey,
soon, man. All
thank
the
you.
best. All right, bye-bye.